Record. I'm going to share my screen.
Watch my language. Ooh.
So welcome to tonight's webinar. We're going to talk about why donors give. And we have Lorinda Gonzalez from Grants Inc. presenting tonight. And wanted to mention the Center for Social Change. For those of you who don't know it, we're a hub in Coral Gables that amplifies the impact of change makers by promoting growth, collaboration, and wellness through shared resources and innovative programming.
Are you on Coral Way?
We are.
I've been to your office once.
Oh, awesome.
I recognize that. I just recognize that whole setup there.
Great.
Horrible parking from what I remember in that building.
It's gotten better.
Okay, I do remember going there.
We have different ways that you can be involved. We have membership that includes physical workspace, but we also have ally memberships, so you can be a member and have access to programming like this without actually having membership at the center. We do have event space for rent, and we offer different services like bookkeeping, grant research and writing, and fiscal sponsorship. And we have, like I mentioned, different ways that you can be involved, from actually having a physical space to being an ally, or even just having a mailbox. And this program is part of our capacity building workshops. We also have other networking and wellness opportunities. And we'd love for you to join us online on Facebook, Instagram, or subscribe to our newsletter. And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Lorinda so she can introduce herself in the session.
That slide was really quick. Could you put the Instagram name in the chat? I completely didn't see it.
Yes, I will.
Follow you. I will follow you.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So it's nice to meet you, Alexander, and also for those, hi to those who will end up seeing this later on. My name is Lorinda Gonzalez. I've worked with the center in partnership with them for many years. It's been a while. We have a really good partnership, and I'm really excited to be able to, have opportunities like this to teach, because really educating people on how grants work, how to access funding and what that really looks like is kind of one of my passions. It's really one of my biggest things. So to give you just a really quick, as I set this up, background on myself, I've been a grant writer for about 10 years. Probably it's been a little bit longer than 10 years now. So I have all the, fancy certifications on the wall. I have a master's degree in communication and all that stuff. And more importantly, I've focused a lot on nonprofits, also for-profits, and how they can access grant funds. So my firm, I started off as just doing it on my own, and now we've grown to a team of 8 people. We have different departments. One department focused on research, other ones on budgets, and the program budgets and the finance part of it, and then the grant writers. So we work really, interesting. We're an online company. So right before COVID, we transitioned to a virtual company, which I think is cool. Most of us are here in Miami, but we have a couple of team members in other states. And one of the really nice things is over time, we've brought in about $17 million. We're actually at $17 million of grant funds. So far, today alone, we submitted $800,000 worth of grants today. I hope they get them. It was a great program. So, and that really is just a testament to, the impact that the money can have in the community, because that just has supported so many people in so many places. So it's really exciting work. So that's a little bit about me. But to get into the PowerPoint, today what we're going to talk about is why do donors give? Again, the hyper focused on grant donors. We're going to talk about why it is that they give, because there's actually a very big difference between the way a government funder and the purpose a government funder is giving versus, let's say, a private donor or a private foundation. So I want to go through what that looks like, so that as you're moving forward with your own grant writing and your own process of finding funding to support your programs, you understand their purpose in giving in the first place, because that's going to help level the playing field and help you communicate better with them. So there are, like I said, there are many different reasons why grant funders provide financial support. And I really feel that it's empowering to learn the reasons why, so that we know how to approach them correctly, because every funder you have to approach very differently. And I think just from a communication perspective in general, it's good to understand who your listener is or your reader is, and understand why they're giving and why they're supporting, and where this money is coming from, which we're going to go through a little bit as well. And that'll help you draft narrative that will be intriguing and enticing to them to hopefully support your project. So there's 3 primary funders
And
here.
real
Yes.
quick, are you sharing your PowerPoint? We're
I am.
just seeing
Can
the
you
back
see it?
of your
Really?
screen.
I'm so glad you said something because I'm here. Da 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 da. Okay, wait. Can you see it now?
I think it's coming. It's white right now, but
Wait a second. Sharing is being paused. Wait, hold on. Just cut the video. Okay, let me do it this way. Is it showing up now?
There you go.
yep.
There we go. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go back and then just show it to you. So we can
Is that Sarah on the wall there?
see.
Is that you, Sarah?
It looks like it, right? So here was just the first one, so you guys
Oh,
can
that's
see that
Sarah holding the money. Oh, okay.
money. We're the money people. And then we were here. So, okay, cool. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. So, okay, so the 3 funders, right? So our main 3 funders here in the United States is going to be the government, which is broken down into federal, state, and local municipalities, which we'll talk about. Our foundation funders, which is your community and local foundations that we know about, and then our corporate funders. So each 3 of those categories of funders have very, very different reasons why it is they fund. And they also have very different dollar amounts that they give. So we're going to go through, I found some statistics that I've used a couple years ago, and I found some new ones so we can compare and see what this money looks like. And then there's also a little bonus slide at the end that gives you some ideas on how to find these funds. So how much money is available in grant funds? Sarah, you already know the answer. So Alexander, I would love for you to guess. How much money do you think is available?
Millions?
Yeah, give me a number. How many millions? 5 million, 10 million? What
Oh,
do you think?
with all 3,
All 3.
$200 million.
Great guess. It's actually almost $1 trillion.
Wow.
It's a lot of money, and it's going up. It's not going down. That's it's a misconception in the grant field that it's an industry that's going down, that because of like
Yeah.
COVID, that there's less money.
Uh-huh.
Completely
That's
not
what I thought.
accurate. Yeah. So most people, I did too, honestly. I was thinking it would be that way, and it's really not. We've done more in the past from when COVID started until now. Just with us, we've done more federal grants, more multi-million-dollar grants. We've had more activity, I think, now than I've probably had in many years. And we've been really busy, which is a blessing, and great for the nonprofits because they're really, and for-profits, because we're working with for-profits now too. But there's a lot of funding that is coming out because in a lot of circumstances, the funding is meant to start to work towards resolution in different community problems. So when there's new community problems, all of a sudden more money comes out. So it's kind of an opposite, way to look at it. But yeah, it's almost $1 trillion. I think by next year, it's going to be at $1 trillion. I think the last number I checked was like 995 billion or something like that. So we're going to talk about the government first. The United States government is one of the biggest funders in the world. So I would like to go through that a little bit. So the federal government is giving over $500 billion annually. I suspect this is way higher post-COVID. I haven't seen what the actual numbers are. I haven't seen them released yet, but it's over $500 billion. There's over 1,000 different grant programs, and there are 26 different federal grant making agencies. It's really cool because I have a personal goal of one day applying to grants in every single one of those 26 federal agencies. I think we're up to like 8 now. The 2 that we submitted today were for the Florida Department of Education. We've done USDA, we've done NIH. I'm working on some NIH grants right now, some Department of the Military. It goes on and on, but all these different federal agencies, they're all going to have different grant programs, and underneath each agency, they're going to have the individual grants. So you can find all this information on grants.gov. It's a website that is constantly being updated like every 2 minutes, if not quicker. It's a little bit complex as far as how to extract the information you need, but Sarah and I are actually working on a series of workshops. We were just talking about this recently to go through how to do this, because there is a lot of money available. It is accessible to many different nonprofit and for-profits, so it's a cool opportunity. So then we're going to go through state funding. And we're just going to go through how this works, and then I'm going to explain to you why it is that they fund. So state funding is very much a trickle down effect. Imagine, it's a rainstorm outside, you have a really big tree, and the water at the top is the federal dollars, and what trickles down the leaves is going to be your state money. So there's a trickle down effect. And what we see is that the municipalities, they receive money, and the states, they receive money directly from the federal government. So the federal government will give money to the state of Florida, and then they will then disperse it to local communities. So there's usually two types of grants that are common in state funding. You have either competitive or formula grants. Competitive grants is exactly as it says, it's a competitive bid process that you're going through in essence, but formula grants are a little bit different. In the federal or the government world, as it, in totality, it really is more of a technical writing assignment, for lack of a better word. So they give you very specific information, kind of like a college essay type of deal, and they're very specific on what they want to see you respond, and they base it on a score. So they'll give you a score, a certain amount of points per section, and then they tally up your points, and based on your points, you move forward. So it's not based very much on emotional appeal. It's not based on whether they like your project more or not. It's very much technical. So with the state funding, it's exactly the same thing. It's more of a technical formula grants. And there's different types of agencies that you'll find in each state, and this does vary with all 50 states in the US. But most of the agencies will be ones that focus on education, like Florida Department of Education, what we did today. Health, we've had a couple of clinics that have received funding from state funds to support their clinics. We have housing, development, transportation, agriculture. Depending on what the specific state needs and what the community needs, you'll find grants that are, again, coming from the federal government, being trickled down into the state and then dispersed to these different like agencies within the state. And then there's not one main website. I mean, there's some information at the end of the presentation. There's not one main website, but usually you can go to the state's website, and from there you can start to find some of these resources. So then we have, now that we've talked about government, federal, we're talking about our states. Now we're breaking it down into county, city, and municipality funding. Typically, when we have, let's say, the city of Miami or Miami-Dade County, right, is giving grants, it's going to be for very local needs. So they may provide funding for housing units for elderly or local medical clinics serving, people who are underserved. They are also usually open to local nonprofits that are, again, serving the local community. So if you have programs in Dade County and you also have programs in Broward, that might not necessarily work out. You'd want to look for funding just for your Dade County recipients, not necessarily Broward, because they're going to be very hyper focused on the geographic area. They typically are posted on local government websites. Miami-Dade County's website has a link called Grants Mail that I recommend that everybody signs up to. It's like a monthly, I believe, newsletter. Maybe it may go out a little bit more often. But you basically put your email, you get a newsletter, and it's going to give you an idea of a lot of the grants that are coming out, federal, local, and also some foundations. So it's a nice free resource to kind of get the ball rolling. They also do offer meetings and an overview of the RFPs, which are the requests for proposals. So it's like a call to action that is open to the public. And I always recommend, I don't know about how they're doing it now. I'm sure there's probably an online component to it, but every single time that the county will put out a grant, anybody can attend these meetings and ask questions up until a certain time frame. At that point, the cone of silence begins, where you can't ask anyone questions. But what I like about it is that you can go to these meetings and see where the money is going. And the reason being is because it is public funding that they're dispersing. So they do make it open and available. Some of these grants are renewed annually, some are not. And that is totally based on the budgets and the allocations for the year and what's going on within that municipality. So there was an environmental grant that was being given out for many years here in Dade County. And a few years ago, they stopped it because they ran out of funding, or they, kind of reallocated funding. So it's something that it's not always every single year, but it's good funding to get. It's a little complicated. I mean, it's definitely a government grant. So we're talking about this technical writing again, not the emotional appeal, but it's totally doable and a viable option if that's what you want to do. So now I'm going to raise a question. Why do you think it is that the government, and I'll stop sharing, why do you think the government funds so much money?
Well, isn't it part of kind of like the law, because people pay taxes, so X amount of money must go to education and the schools and the roads. So then X amount of it must go to giving back through RFPs to the community, I guess.
Yep, definitely one of the reasons. Sarah, do you have any ideas? Why do you think like the government gives grant money? I don't think we've ever had this in another class. You might not.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that.
Right? It's interesting. So I'm going to show you why. So desktop 2, can you see the question mark?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So this is, I think this is really cool information. So why does the government provide grant funding? Now, this information comes from a couple of experiences. It comes from courses that I've taken, but it also comes from me having the wonderful opportunity to work in DC. I think it's been 2 years already. I went to DC 4 times, and I was taking courses with alongside federal grant makers, which is incredible because I was able to see what their process is, right? So I learned a lot and asked 1,000 questions. So the first thing that happens is that the federal government is reactive, right? What they do is they disperse funds based on community issues that are coming up. As soon as there's a major community issue, they are going to dump money into it to try to find a resolution. A perfect example is COVID-19 vaccine. While the science behind that has been going on for quite some time, the disbursement of the vaccine the vaccines was grant funded. Pfizer received grants, Moderna received grants. I wouldn't be surprised if Johnson & Johnson did as well. But this was grant funded and was funded by the National Institute of Health. That's the way that we get all these mass medical things out there. So, which is interesting because it's a private company, but these private companies are applying to federal dollars, which is funding the research and development of, for example, the vaccine, and then the disbursement of it. And then after that point, they sell it, and it gets more into the for-profit side. But because of the COVID situation, one of the ways that they were reactive to the situation was to fund the COVID-19 vaccines. Another example is solar energy. We know that environmentalists have been saying this for a long time, that the grid, our electrical grid is way overused and it's really bad for the earth. So the federal government has recognized that, and now they are dispersing grant funding to try to find ways that companies can come in and create solar powered energy to kind of take some of that pressure off of the grid. So the USDA has funds for this. Department of Agriculture has funds for this. There's multiple different departments that have all, because they've all recognized that this is a major issue that we have here in the United States, and therefore they are providing funding to companies, for profit and nonprofit, to try to come up with a resolution. So I thought that was interesting. And then these 3 examples are all examples of projects we've worked on. Not the COVID one, I just read about that one. But the last one, which is really interesting, is supporting farmers. So there are areas in the United States where farmers do not have access, specifically farmers from the Black and Latino populations do not have access to the main cities where they can sell their produce. And the people that live there don't have access to the farmers, so they have no access to the produce. So there's these huge disparities showing the access to these healthy foods in these low income and primarily Black and Latino communities is not happening as it should. So the USDA has come up with grants. It was one that recently closed to support farmers who want to try to create a connection between the two. So, which is really cool. It was actually one of my favorite projects that we worked on. So it's interesting because, again, like I said, the government is reactive. Their purpose, and one of their purposes in giving grant money, is to find a solution or work through problems that they find are happening in the community. It's also political. That's the reality as well. Every time there's a new presidency, there's new funding that's coming on, which is very similar to what you were saying, Alexander, because there is, these are our tax dollars. That's the reality. And depending on what promises were made or whatever was discussed in the campaigns, that will sometimes change legislation and change the way things are going. And that does kind of re-navigate where the funds go. So we've had presidencies where NASA was very well funded by grants, and then all of a sudden it was cut back, and things like that. There's a lot of up and down with it. There's the Grant Professional Association, I believe it's GPA. They produce a really cool book. I mean, it's cool for me because I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to this stuff, but they produce like a kind of like a little manual that you can read about. And the first time I read it, I was alarmed because I had no idea how much this was connected to the politics. So a lot of people that are in the field of grants and they want to stay ahead of the game and ahead of the trends, they start to read all this legislator thing, these things that are going on and what these topics are that the candidates are discussing, that they're supporting, because very likely that's going to directly relate to the grant funding that's going to be made available later on. So I thought that was really interesting. And then also the third one is change makers, innovative nonprofits and for-profits. You matter, because if you have a project that is funded today, let's say the farmers is a great example. Let's say that person gets funded. How they use the money and what effect they see with that money, like were they able to support the farmers? Were they able to connect the farmers with the low-income communities that have no access to the produce? Whatever data they're collecting goes back to the federal government, and they use that data to make future decisions. So this is a constant kind of positive moving force, so to speak, because depending on what that grant recipient does with the money and what they report back, because there's a whole ballgame as far as reporting. But that reporting is really, it actually really is used to change laws and to change the way funding is being used in the future. So that part to me is super exciting, because it's a way that we can be change makers by actually going after these grants, getting the money, having really successful and impactful programs that are then hopefully, changes the way we do things moving forward. So that's why the federal government and the, local governments fund. So any questions regarding government or any thoughts so far?
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Interesting, right? Interesting stuff. So now we're going to go into private foundations and philanthropists. I love this painting. I like to paint. So I saw this painting. When I looked up philanthropists, this is what came up. And I kind of had the thought process of like the rich and the affluent kind of hanging out back in the day type of deal. I thought this was cool. But so to talk about private foundations and philanthropists, why is it that they fund? So this is kind of a blurry picture, but first off, I wanted to define who we're talking about. So we're talking about 4 different types of foundations. We have independent, operating, corporate, and community. We're going to go through corporate a little bit more in detail later on because they are listed here, but I kind of wanted to separate them because they're very interesting. But these are the 4 types of foundations in the United States. An independent one is all your Miami Foundation, is going to be Miami Foundation would be community. Independent one would be like if you have an affluent family, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a good example. They're going to be your largest foundations in the United States, and they're generally established because you have a donor or donor families that want to give. So these are your traditional affluent families that maybe had some kind of funding. We have Gloria Stefan has a great foundation, the Perez Family Foundation. There's a lot of them. Some of them are local, some of them are nationwide. But they had some kind of wealth in their lifetime and they wanted to set up an independent foundation. Your second one is an operating foundation, which is really interesting because operating foundations, there are a lot of them. And what they do is they are a foundation, so they're a giving entity, but they only fund their own programs. They're not there to give money or give funding support to outside nonprofits. They manage their own programs, they run their own programs, they fund their own programs. So they're a little bit more closed. They also can be managed by donors and donor families. So sometimes they're also very affluent individuals that maybe have given funding. Sometimes you'll also see operating foundations. For example, let me see if I can remember their name, the Rockefellers in New York, the bankers. So they have an operating foundation. They do give externally sometimes because they're so huge, but they're an operating foundation in that they have their own programs and their own ideas of where they want to see their money, and they're able to, do it that way. So those are operating. The difference between independent is more public. They fund more outside organizations. Operating funds more internal. Corporate we'll get into a little bit later, but that's really going to be any major corporation or company that has a foundation associated. And then we have our community foundations, which is going to be Coral Gables Foundation here locally, and the Miami Foundation, Key Biscayne Foundation. They're hyper-focused on the local community. And what they do is a lot of them will collect funding, again, from residents of the area or people who want to support the area. And all that money gets pulled into accounts and then it's dispersed to different community projects. But they're very focused on small local communities. So those are the 4 different types of foundations that we have in the US. So the total US giving, now I want you to remember this number. In 2018, it was $427 billion. Now remember that because we're going to go through the 2020 numbers in a little while. So from those statistics, 292 billion was given by individuals. So these were individuals that donate. So if you go to Publix and they say, can we, give $1 for child with cancer, that type of stuff. So individual giving, it's about 75 billion was being given in foundations, 39 billion in bequests. So after a person passes away, the money that they would leave will go under that category, and then $20 billion in corporations. Now this was 2018. Now, if we jump to 2020, the number has gone up to $471 billion. So that's $50 billion difference in 2 years. That's a lot of money. So like I said, the field is not shrinking. There's not less money. There's a lot more money. We have about 69% is giving by individuals, 19% in foundations. That's a pretty big jump. 9% in bequests and 4% is given by corporations. So corporations have decreased since 2019, but we've seen an increase in bequests, in foundations, and giving by individuals. So I thought that was really interesting. And the giving by individuals kind of makes sense because there's been so many. If you just think about what we see on TV, there's all these things that are going on like with the COVID situation and people are just giving and donating, I think that's why there's a little bit of an increase there. And then so take a look also, I like this right-hand side where it says, where did the charitable dollars go? I'm gonna take a sip of water and feel free to take a peek at that and see the different areas that most of this foundation funding is going to. So you and Sarah, Alexander and Sarah, you would both probably fall under arts, culture, and humanities, would make sense. Maybe also health for
Or even education.
education as well. Sarah would also fall under education. I don't see, environmental specifically with animals is here, but Sarah, you would also fall under health because you talk about fish and, actually getting local fish and things like that. So there's a lot of different places, and this is a very general list. I don't want you to see this as law because as you can see, one program could fall under many different categories. So but I thought this was pretty good just to see how much it's grown.
I'm surprised that the corporations is as low.
I don't know exactly because I didn't go into this. Excuse me, I didn't go into it in detail, but I think the reason corporations have gone down, I think is because corporations just have been suffering a lot from the financial, some of them have, from the financial perspective. Well, no, because
Individuals suffer too, and they're still giving.
yes, and they're still giving, Yep, interesting, right? Growth, human services has rapidly grown, human services, when the US has had a crisis, right? So it's kind of reactive also in a lot of ways. So yeah, I thought this was pretty interesting. And online giving has reached the highest share of total giving on record. So we've done more online giving now than ever before. Also very interesting. So I like this. I like this data. Giving USA 2021, that is an amazing source for this type of data. They're very good at keeping on top of all the different, all the different numbers. So I would say I would recommend taking a peek at that. I use them all the time. So question, why, now that we know how much money is given, why do we think the private industry gives? What are some of the reasons?
Well, I was going to say possibly for like a legacy. If I'm a firefighter and I've retired and I want to give money for educating up and coming future firefighters, I think something like a legacy thing.
Yep, definitely. And Sarah?
You mean like corporations? Why do they give or?
Anybody except corporations. So like a foundation or a affluent family, somebody like that.
I mean, I think a lot of those were founded to, better the communities. And since we've been having crisis after crisis after crisis.
I know.
They're being reactive positively as part of it.
Yeah.
What about tax breaks? Don't they get tax breaks?
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get there. So, I can go. So specifically they definitely get tax breaks, which we're going to talk about in the next section. But a lot of the founders of community foundations or of family foundations, the independent ones, they may have had board members that had some kind of emotional tie to the foundation's mission. They may have had a family member that passed away from a certain disease, or they themselves maybe had lived in poverty and now they're wealthy and they want to be able to give back. So there's a lot of emotional appeal. And this is why when you're doing grant writing for foundations, you find that they're more emotionally based because they're emotionally based in how they were founded. So that kind of articulates a little bit into how they do their grants as well. So a family medical issue, a hard upbringing, like I said, there was an organization that we worked with quite some time ago that had a assisted living facility for elderly Latino individuals here in Dade County, and they received a very large donation from an Alzheimer's, not the Alzheimer's Foundation, but a Alzheimer's Foundation, who there was the husband and wife, and I believe it was the wife's mother who had passed away due to Alzheimer's, and that was why they gave them over $1 million. So that was really interesting. So again, it was that emotional appeal. Then we have community members that want to give back in their area. The Miami Foundation is a great one. They very focused on Dade County. Sometimes you'll have, and this is really interesting too, on research reports, we'll get back, let's say it's a nonprofit in Miami, but we're getting back foundations in, I think it was like Tennessee or Oklahoma. And it's like, how does that make sense? Well, if you look into it a little bit more, one of their board members, one specifically, was from Miami. So they want to see money go back to Miami because that's where they were born and raised. They don't live there now, but that's where their heart is, so to speak. And then also, like we mentioned earlier, to honor a past loved one or someone or a group of people that they really appreciated. Those are some of the reasons. So I think it's interesting because if you look at how the government funds, the government is very reactive on what are the community issues. Let's go ahead and put money towards it to resolve these problems. And foundations are a little bit more emotional. They're a little bit more, they're set up foundationally, from more of an emotional perspective. And even when you do the grants, you have to pull their heartstrings. It's kind of like the key term there, right? You want to really, convince them. And I mean that from a good perspective about what your program is, what the impact is, but there's more of an emotional appeal versus technical writing. So I think it's just interesting how it ties back to why they give and how it is you approach the writing. So then we have corporate donors, or big corporations. So corporate funding. So there's two main types of support that corporations will give. There's traditional grant funds, which we know about, and there's also sponsorships and in-kind donations. So that can be funds for events, which doesn't happen as much now as it used to, donating food. If you were to go to your local Publix or Whole Foods, they would give you food, or they could give you gift cards to buy food. They may give you clothing, they may give you space, but they're going to give you something besides just traditional grants. It typically will have an availability of something physical that can be used, computers, whatever it may be that you would need.
Yeah, I just found one yesterday. Panavision is, if you write, they donate camera equipment for the movie shoot.
There you go. Panavision. And like I had a nonprofit that has a boat that is wheelchair accessible, and he would take people out on the boat fishing. We were able to get him fishing equipment from Bass Pro Shops, I believe.
Yeah,
They gave him fishing equipment, which is fantastic, right? So it's cool, and I think it's important because everybody kind of chases the grant funds, which is great, but the value of an in-kind donation is amazing, and it does help you apply for grants later on down the line, which is another conversation. But there's a lot of value in-kind donations. So corporations are very, very good at giving out different donations. And I have a list. I don't know why I switched. I have a list of somewhere that I'll send when we send out the PowerPoint of a bunch of corporate donation programs that are available if you want to see it. So,
yeah, please.
Yes.
So
So
where my money comes from.
yeah, no, absolutely. I'll share that with you. It's one of the resources we collected like a while ago, but it's good. It shows you who you can apply to what. I think there's links. They also, what's interesting about corporate funders though, so we kind of talked about the government, they're reactive, they're supporting community issues. We talked about foundations who are all about, they are all about, the emotional appeal, but corporations, before I get into that, why do you think it is that they give?
Their image.
Their image.
I'll definitely say their image.
Their image, absolutely. So their image, and corporate foundations want visibility. So why are they doing it? These are the reasons why they're doing it. They pay less taxes because the money, this is an interesting tax code, and unless it's changed, which I don't think it has, a corporation, let's say Starbucks, for example, we'll just use Starbucks, they donate $100 million to their foundation, as long as they spend approximately 5% of that $100 million on grant-related activities, there's a long list of what those are. The other 95% of the money that's in there is tax-free. So that's a huge tax benefit versus paying 30-40% if it was staying in their for-profit company. So there's a lot of tax benefits that they get. Social responsibility is another thought, and public relations, if they have a bad perspective. One way to kind of change that and change the way we see a company is if they are supporting the community. Sometimes in an attempt to improve an image, if there was, again, some kind of issue or something that came up, they'll use, these grant funds to, these grant programs to kind of shift and change their image. And I mean, there are many circumstances where they do it to give back to the community. I mean, they're not all, negative. I don't want to say it that way, but they're not all negative, but there are situations where they're giving back to community. However, what I will tell you is that to be successful in getting a corporate grant, the trick is visibility. How much visibility can you give to the corporation? How many people go to your website? How many likes does your social media get? They want to see typically their logos and their information on everything, and they want that visibility. So if that's something that you can offer, then definitely a corporate donor for a traditional grant is a great idea. If not, it might be a little bit more of a challenge for you. And a good example of it is if you're driving, I don't know if it's still there, but if you're driving in downtown towards Omni, that area, you'll see that there's a building on the right-hand side that says something about Carnival. And I think it's close to the Adrian Arch Center, close to the.
Yeah, by the arena, yeah.
Right. So that was multi-million dollars that was given. Why? Because that wall has tremendous visibility because of all the traffic, because everybody's
Yep.
going out that area, they're seeing it, right? So that was probably one of the reasons why Carnival donated the money to the Adrian Arts. Do they support the arts? I'm sure they do in some capacity, but the visibility of that wall is pretty nice. So those are some of the things you see with corporate donors. So we have, I mean, with us, I would say corporate donations, corporate grants is what we do the least of because we work with a lot of small and medium sized nonprofits that maybe don't have so much fancy, you know what I'm saying? They don't have so much visibility, so it's not always the best option. But if it is something you want to go for, now you have an idea of what they're looking for. So here's a little bit more information I wanted to share as far as if you do decide to approach or apply to any of these grants. These are just some general information. Feel free to screenshot it on where you would go and how you would get it. So like I said, grants.gov is where your federal grants are going to be housed. Your state, each state agency should have a website that you can see if there's any grants available. If not, you can always contact state representatives. We have a client right now that did this and they're receiving equipment for their program. And I think it's like 500 grand of equipment because a senator supports what they're doing. So reaching out to your state representatives and letting them know what you're doing and what impact you're seeking in the community and seeking their support is one avenue of getting funding. Also, again, your municipalities is going to be your local Dade County grants, City of Miami grants. Those are coming out routinely. We have our corporations, which if you're as a corporation you're interested in, you can literally look up Starbucks Foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation and whatnot, and it's going to pop up and you can read there a little bit more. They all have a lot, most of their applications tend to be open. Ford Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, they're open and you can go on their website and apply pretty much anytime. That's what I found is kind of the trends with them. Again, they're difficult to get grants from, but those are there. And then of course your foundations, the tool that I like the best is Foundation Directory Online, which is not a free resource, but you can access it for free at, you might be able to access it at if you can get into their library. I know the local Dade County Library will give you access as well, and you can go onto their website and look up information related to foundations, what they're, what they're funding, and what their causes are. The thing I'll tell you though, when it comes to these types of research tools, is usually they're only going to show you what they funded in the past, not necessarily what they're going to fund in the future. So it gives you, it's a good starting point for you to start to find funding, but it doesn't necessarily give you the exact grants that are open. You have to then take that information, go to their websites, and then pull the information on current funding opportunities. So then a couple questions. Number one, which funders do you think are the best for you to approach? And number two, what would be your next steps in reaching out to them? So what do you think?
I mean, I think which I have started doing is doing research on who is going to be more focused and aligned with my objectives, which is, the arts, entertainment / education. So I've started to do that.
Mhm.
And then typically I'd look for on their website if they have an RFP available. Sometimes, we're opening this up October 1st, so you got to wait. Sometimes there's a hard date or you've passed it. I've noticed that's happened to me a few times. I've never done any cold call letters or even phone calls except for the Ford Foundation.
Okay.
Couldn't see where to apply, so I just called them and spoke to somebody, and then they ended up giving me a name and address, and I just wrote to them like an LOI, and I never heard back. That was the only time I did something a little different.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, each one is different. I mean, LOI is a good kind of document to have and to update and to send out because we've had, it's interesting. And Sarah knows, Sarah had this where she sent one out and it was an application, right? And then you heard back from them a year later. So sometimes this happens, we had the one we
But
did.
after I followed up, so,
Yeah.
even if you haven't heard anything for a little bit, kick the ball back in their court. And Lorinda has several workshops where she has a process for this that's, it's really helpful.
The 333 process. Yeah. There's, the thing with grants is you have to be consistent, with it. You have to be very well organized. The missing due dates happens to everybody all the time. And it's one of these things where if you put a little bit of time into it on a weekly basis, bi-weekly, depending on what your commitment is to it, if you consistently are researching opportunities, drafting documents, things like that, doing all these different steps, and you do it, you're going to get funded. I mean, it's, almost all of our clientele is funded. The only ones that haven't been funded, or, because it's like a theory I've tested for a while, are the ones that, do I know when they're going to